Now for the Democratic response, I am joined by Virginia Senator Mark Warner. Senator, it's good to see you.
Candy, great to see you.
Okay, let's start on this financial reform bill since you have been working on it. A couple of questions here. First of all, administration officials have let it be known that they just as soon let go of this $50 billion liquidation fund. Is that okay with you?
Listen, there are different ways to get at this, but let's back up and look at where we started. One, this bill has been very bipartisan. Senator Corker from Tennessee, Republican senator, and I have been working for more than a year trying to get this right, recognizing our goal was, one, end too big to fail, two, never have public taxpayer exposure again, and three, make sure that we set up financial rules of the road for the 21st century. First thing we did was we created a systemic risk council so that all of the regulators could get together and have an early warning system to make sure that we didn't get in the crisis in the first place again. Second, we put in place requirements that these large institutions would have to have additional capital, that we'd be able to limit the amount of leverage so it wasn't a traditional 10 or 15 to 1, but we saw some of the 50 and 100 to 1 leverage rates that needed to be ratcheted back. Third, we created a whole new area of what's called contingent capital that would convert to equity if a bank got in troubles again.
That's a liquidation.
No, these are just tripwires, speed bumps to make sure we don't get to a crisis. And four, we put in place a requirement that said these large systemically important firms, they've got to write their own funeral plan so that if they get in trouble, there's an orderly process through bankruptcy that can unwind them appropriately. We then said, even if all those tripwires don't preclude a crisis, we then want to make sure there's orderly process through bankruptcy. But if there's this crisis coming at once, and you've got to use what would be called resolution. And resolution we set up so a way that it would be no rational management team would ever want. It means the company's going out of business. It means it's being liquidated. It means the shareholders are going away. The management is disappearing. This truly is a death panel. We're saying, how do you get through liquidation? We didn't want the taxpayer to fund that. So we said, if we put together a little bit of this fund, $50 billion, that would be funded by industry to keep the lights on until you could actually borrow enough money using the FDIC process to orderly resolve and get rid of the firm. Now, if there's a way to cut that back or make it smaller, I'm willing to look at it. I'd love to hear from Senator McConnell and some of the others specifics, not just general attacks. But one of the things that I think is a bit hypocritical, if there hadn't been this fund, there potentially could be a gap in financing right there where the taxpayers could again be exposed.
You know, the Democrats have really gone after Mitch McConnell for his saying, oh, this is a taxpayer bailout. I want to play you something that Secretary Geithner said recently about this very same fund.
If you create a fund in advance, there's a risk you're going to create more moral hazard. People will live the expectation where the government will come in and protect them. We don't want to create that expectation. That's why we think it's better to do it after the fact.
So that's exactly what Senator McConnell's been saying, yes?
Well, I think what Secretary Geithner was talking about, in the House bill, there is a larger fund, $150 billion. Nobody in the financial sector thinks that a $50 billion amount, and again, originally Senator Corker and I had suggested something more in the neighborhood of 2025, was going to be enough to kind of resolve a whole series of firms that might be going down simultaneously. This is really a chance to buy a little bit of time and not have taxpayers exposed. There's different ways to get at this. There's a way to create a trust that could be funded through the industry. There's ways to kind of cut it back and give the FDIC borrowing ability a little bit quicker. But what we'd like to hear from, our Senate Republican leader is specific suggestions. I mean, this is Senator Corker and I's best chance. It was bipartisan put together. If there's a better way or easier ways to do it.
Support at this point. All the Republicans have said the bill as is not going to work. So there's not a bipartisan bill.
What they have said is Senator Corker and others who've worked on this bill have said there are ways that the problems in this bill can be fixed. I think his term was in 5 minutes. Well, let's get together and fix those problems.
But you've got a leader that's saying put it on the floor.
Well, what we're saying is let's put it on the floor so that we can offer the kind of amendments. And I think there would be bipartisan amendments where there's areas, if we can tighten it up, let's do it. But what I'd love to hear from the Republican leader is not these broad brush critiques. We're going to go back into session tomorrow. Let's have those 3 or 4 suggestions, put them out there. Let's talk about them. We've spent well over a year trying to get this to the best place possible. The one thing, those of us on the committee have been working on is we realize if we mess this up, it could have huge implications downstream. So we want to get it right. This should not be a partisan issue. Getting it right, financial rules of the road for the 21st century, never again having the kind of meltdown where we had taxpayer exposure 18 months ago, and 18 months later, the fact that we still don't have new rules of the road, I think it's time to get on with it.
One of the things in this bill has to do with a couple of new agencies or entities that are going to watch over something. It struck me this Wednesday, Senator Levin held a hearing looking at what happened in the meltdown, and he said something I thought was really interesting.
So where were the bank regulators? The painful fact is that they had a front row seat to Washington Mutual's high-risk lending strategy, its poor quality loans, and substandard securitization practices, but did little to stop it.
Okay, so, and let me put up on the screen for our viewers just the number of financial industry regulators there are around that already exist, and we still had the meltdown. They were asleep at the switch. Goldman Sachs was, at least has been charged with, and says it's innocent, but has been charged with really monkeying around with these derivatives. So you have all these regulators. Now you're going to create more regulatory agencies, more oversight committees. Why are they going to work any better than the multiple ones that are in place?
Well, Candy, one of the things that failed in the last crisis was the fact that these individual regulators, one, didn't have current time data, and two, they were operating in silos. So one of the things we did create was not a new regulatory agency. Matter of fact, we've consolidated bank regulators from 4 down to 3. I'd like to have seen further consolidation.
And trillions of dollars of transactions in this little...
Let me answer the question. The question is, we've created a systemic risk council that says, let's make sure that the SEC, the Prudential Bank Regulator, the Fed, they actually all come together and share that information, because some of these firms, it may have been their broker-dealer that was causing the problem, not their banking component, but you've got to share above the silos. Then we did create something that will give these regulators on a current daily basis an exposure into the amount of all the transactions that are taking place. A so-called Office of Financial Responsibility hasn't gotten any attention, but will give real-time that data. And this Systemic Risk Council, which will be this early warning system, we think will actually allow this aggregation of data that didn't take place in the past.
I have to ask you really quickly here. I said to Senator McConnell, listen, you look as though you want to take this to the polls rather than actually come together. The same can be said on the Democratic side, that you would much rather be able to go to the polls and say, we don't have a single Republican on this bill. You see, they're on the side of Wall Street and we're not. So aren't there politics being played on both sides?
Candy, I'm still relatively new to this job, and I didn't get the memo yet that we weren't actually supposed to get stuff done in a bipartisan way. I mean, Bob Corker and I have been working at this for a year. I know Judd Gregg and Jack Reed have been working on it. There's a lot of bipartisan action here. This should not be a partisan bill. My hope is we can get a bill that will get 75 votes, because, we need to set financial rules of the road for the next 50 to 60 years. We had pretty good rules of the road that were set in the 30s that lasted us 80 years. I'd love to see a bill that will put the next 80 years rules in place.
Senator Mark Warner, always good to see you. Always too short. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Candy.
When we come back, a closer look at those encouraging signs about the economy. Then we'll talk about what it all means with our panel.